The words sliced through the air like shattered glass. You never loved me. My daughter's voice cracked with 24 years of accumulated resentment as she stood in my kitchen, her mascara running down her flushed cheeks. I felt my chest cave in, the accusation hitting harder than any physical blow I'd ever endured. Without a word, I slowly lifted my blouse, revealing the jagged 8-inch scar across my abdomen, the permanent reminder of the emergency C-section that saved her life and nearly took mine. "This is what I got when you were born," I whispered, my fingers tracing the raised tissue that had never properly healed. "The doctors gave me a choice that day. You or me. I chose you, Emily. I've always chosen you." Her eyes widened, then darted away. In 24 years, I'd never shown her the scar. I'd never told her how I'd hemorrhaged on the delivery table, how the doctors had given me a 10% chance of survival, how I'd signed the form prioritizing her life over mine when complications arose. Some truths you shield your children from, until they stand before you, wounded and wounding, demanding to know why you never loved them enough. The grandfather clock in the hallway ticked loudly in the silence that followed. Outside, the Pennsylvania winter pressed against the windows of my modest Scranton home, frost flowers blooming on the glass. Emily stood frozen, her accusation hanging between us like visible breath in cold air. "You don't understand what love is," she finally said, her voice quieter but no less cutting. "A scar doesn't prove anything." I felt something inside me crack, a dam I'd built decades ago. "Sit down," I told her, my voice steadier than I felt. "It's time you learned what happened before you were born, and everything that came after." Emily hesitated, clutching her designer handbag, a gift from her father, no doubt, like a shield. For a moment, I thought she might walk out, slamming the door like she had so many times before. Instead, she sank into the chair across from me at the kitchen table, where I'd once helped her with homework, bandaged skinned knees, and later, wrote out checks for college tuition I couldn't afford. "I'm listening," she said, though her posture told me she'd already made up her mind. I took a deep breath. How do you compress a lifetime of sacrifice into words someone can understand when they've already decided you're the villain in their story? I'd spent 24 years putting her first. Choices made, opportunities abandoned, dreams deferred. The scar on my stomach was just the beginning, the most visible mark of a body and soul mapped with invisible sacrifices. It started in the summer of 1999, I began, my voice dropping to almost a whisper. I was 19, working 2 jobs, with plans to start community college in the fall. I paused, remembering the girl I'd been, ambitious, bright-eyed, believing the world had a place for me. Then I met your father. Emily stiffened at the mention of Richard, the man who'd left when she was 8, only to reappear in her life as the successful businessman with endless cash and weekend visits, never having to enforce bedtimes or help with science projects. He'd become her hero while I remained the disciplinarian, the worrier, the one who couldn't afford the presents he showered on her. "Dad has nothing to do with this," she snapped. "He has everything to do with this," I countered, feeling decades of buried truths rising to the surface. "You think you know our story, Emily, but you've only heard the convenient parts, his parts. Today, you'll hear mine." I reached for my phone and silenced it, knowing Emily's father might call, as he often did when she visited me, somehow always sensing when she was here, always needing something urgently. For once, Richard would wait. For once, my truth would come first. Outside, snow began to fall, thick flakes swirling against the darkening sky. I got up to make tea, a habit from my grandmother, who believed difficult conversations required something warm to hold. As the kettle whistled, I felt lightheaded with the enormity of what I was about to share. I placed a mug in front of Emily, chamomile with honey, still her favorite though she'd never admit it, and watched as she reluctantly wrapped her hands around it. In that moment, I saw flashes of her as a child, the toddler with untamed curls clutching a sippy cup, the elementary schooler blowing on too hot chocolate after sledding, the teenager defiantly switching to coffee, claiming tea was for old people. What she didn't know, what I'd protected her from, was how those ordinary moments had been islands of peace in an ocean of struggle. She didn't know about the eviction notices hidden in drawers, the meals I'd skipped so she could eat, the night classes I'd taken while she slept, the promotions I'd declined because they would have meant less time with her. She didn't know about the men I'd stopped dating because they didn't treat her right. or the dream job in Chicago I'd turned down because moving would have taken her away from the school where she was finally thriving. She didn't know that every decision in my adult life had been filtered through one question: what's best for Emily? Your father wasn't ready to be a parent, I began, choosing my words carefully. Neither was I, if I'm being honest. But when I found out I was pregnant, I made a choice, the first of many choices to become ready. My name is Catherine Brennan, Katie to the few friends who've stuck around through the lean years. I'm 43 now, though most days my body feels decades older. I work as an administrative coordinator at Scranton Medical Center, a job title that makes answering phones and scheduling appointments sound more important than it is. It pays the bills, most months, and came with health insurance that covered Emily's braces, her asthma medications, and the therapy she needed after her father left. My apartment is small, 2 bedrooms in a complex on the east side of Scranton, where the rent hasn't caught up with the gentrification creeping through other neighborhoods. The furniture is mismatched but clean, most pieces salvaged from yard sales or discount outlets. I've made it home with family photos, plants that forgive my sporadic attention, and bookshelves overflowing with volumes I've collected from library sales. My one indulgence. Before Emily was born, I had dreams of becoming a nurse. I'd even been accepted to the program at Pennsylvania State University with a partial scholarship. I still keep the acceptance letter in my bedside drawer, yellowed now with age, a relic from a parallel life I sometimes visit in dreams. Instead, I took night classes at Luzerne County Community College, 1 or 2 at a time, while working days and raising Emily. It took me 8 years to earn my associate's degree. By then, nursing school seemed an impossible horizon, too expensive, too demanding of time I didn't have. I settled for medical office work, telling myself it was adjacent to my original dream, that I was still helping people in some small way. Most mornings I wake before dawn. I've never been able to break the habit from when Emily was small, and early mornings were my only time alone. I make coffee, strong and black, and sit at my kitchen window watching the sky change colors over the city. These quiet moments are when I allow myself to feel the weight of the years, the accumulated fatigue of raising a child largely alone, of always being the responsible one, of deferring my own needs and wants for so long, I sometimes struggle to recognize them. Emily moved out 5 years ago for college at Temple University in Philadelphia. Richard, who had been inconsistently present throughout her childhood, suddenly found his paternal instincts when it came time for college tours. He took her to visit expensive private universities, implanting dreams that her grades and my bank account couldn't support. When she got into Temple with a scholarship, he promised to cover the remaining tuition, a gesture that made him a hero while I was left to explain why she couldn't live in the expensive off-campus apartment he'd shown her. Now she's back in Scranton, working at a marketing firm downtown, a job Richard helped her get through connections. She lives in a sleek apartment in the revitalized warehouse district, where the rent for 1 month equals my entire mortgage payment. She has her father's ambition and confidence, my stubbornness, and a sense of entitlement I'm not sure where she acquired. We meet for lunch every few weeks, conversations carefully navigating around politics, my financial situation, and her father, until today, when she showed up unannounced at my door, eyes blazing with accusations. The fight started, as our arguments often do, about something trivial. I'd forgotten to forward some mail that had come for her, but it quickly escalated, old resentments surfacing like submarines from deep water. She accused me of holding her back, of being jealous of her relationship with Richard, of never supporting her dreams the way he did. "You've always resented me for ruining your life," she said, pacing my living room in her expensive boots. "I can see it every time you look at me." I'd tried to stay calm, to be the reasonable one as I had been throughout her tempestuous teenage years. "That's not true, Emily. I've always wanted what's best for you. What's best for me? You wouldn't even let me go to NYU when Dad offered to pay. You've never wanted me to have more than you did." The injustice of it stung. I hadn't let her go to NYU because Richard's offer to pay had come with strings attached. He wanted her to major in business, to eventually join his company. I'd seen how torn she was, how she really wanted to study journalism, and I'd encouraged her to take the scholarship at Temple where she could follow her own path. But Richard had rewritten that history, casting me as the dream killer, himself as the generous provider thwarted by my bitterness. And Emily, eager to believe the easier narrative, had accepted his version. "Your father's offers always come with conditions. I said quietly. At least he makes offers. What have you ever given me except limitations and excuses about money? That's when she said it, the words that finally broke the dam. You never loved me. You've always seen me as a burden, the reason your life didn't turn out the way you wanted. And that's when I showed her my scar, the physical manifestation of the choice I'd made in that delivery room. Her life over mine. But even that wasn't enough. Even that, she dismissed as manipulation, a guilt trip, not real proof of love. Now, as we sit at my kitchen table with cooling tea between us, I wonder if anything I say will make a difference. Emily has created a narrative where I'm the villain, where her father is the hero, where her struggles are because I gave her too little rather than because I had too little to give. But I have to try. Not because I need her gratitude, I've never asked for that, but because she deserves to know her own history, to understand that love isn't always loud and splashy and expensive. Sometimes it's quiet and constant and costly in ways that don't show up on credit card statements. I was 19 when I got pregnant with you, I continue, watching her face for any softening. Your father was 21, just starting at his father's company. We'd been dating for 6 months. The pregnancy test showed positive on a Tuesday morning in July. I remember sitting on the edge of the bathtub in my parents' house, the plastic stick shaking in my hand, sunlight streaming through the small window making patterns on the linoleum floor. I was supposed to start classes at the community college in 6 weeks. I'd been saving for 2 years, working at Denny's during the day and bartending at night. When I told Richard that evening, sitting in his car outside my parents' modest ranch house, he stared straight ahead, his hands gripping the steering wheel though the engine was off. Are you sure it's mine? He asked finally. The question hit me like a slap. In 6 months of dating, I'd never given him any reason to doubt my faithfulness. Of course it's yours, I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. How can you even ask me that? He ran a hand through his dark hair, the same hair Emily would inherit, and sighed. I can't have a baby right now, Katie. My father just made me junior associate. I'm supposed to take over the Northeast Territory next year. I can't have a baby right now either, I said. But here we are. He turned to me then, his expression softening into what I mistook for understanding. He took my hand, his thumb rubbing circles on my palm, the way he did when we watched movies. Look, I know a place in Allentown. It's clean, discreet. I'll pay for everything. Drive you there and back. I pulled my hand away, suddenly cold despite the July heat. I'm not getting an abortion, Richard. His face hardened. Then I can't help you. My family has expectations. A scandal like this would destroy everything my father's built. A scandal? I repeated, my voice rising. You mean our child? Be realistic, Katie. We're not ready to be parents. You work at Denny's, for God's sake. I have a career to think about. I got out of his car and walked back to my parents' house without looking back, my mind racing with implications and options, my hand instinctively covering my still flat stomach. I thought he might call the next day, that he'd reconsider once the shock wore off. He didn't. A week passed. 2. When I finally worked up the courage to call him, his mother answered and informed me coldly that Richard was unavailable and would remain so. 3 days later, as I was leaving work at Denny's, he was waiting in the parking lot, leaning against his BMW. My heart leapt, foolishly hopeful that he'd had a change of heart. I talked to my father, he said, without preamble. We're prepared to be generous. He held out an envelope. Inside was a check for $5,000 and a typed agreement stating that in exchange for the money, I would make no claims of paternity, seek no child support, and have no contact with Richard or his family. You want to buy our baby's existence away? I asked, disbelief making my voice shake. I want to be practical, he said. This gives you options. You could move somewhere new, start over, or use it for adoption arrangements. He reached out as if to touch my arm, then thought better of it. It's more than fair, Katie. Most guys wouldn't offer anything. I tore the check and agreement into tiny pieces, letting them flutter to the asphalt between us. I don't want your money. I want you to be a father to your child. His expression hardened. That's not going to happen. My family's lawyer will contact you. If you try to establish paternity, we'll fight it. It'll be your word against mine, and my family can afford better lawyers than you can imagine. He left me standing in that parking lot, pieces of his generosity scattered at my feet like confetti from some perverse celebration. When I told my parents that night, their reactions split along the fault lines already running through their marriage. My father, a foreman at the paper mill who measured worth by whether a person did the right thing, declared he would go to the Bradshaws' home himself and make that boy face his responsibilities. My mother, who had always been more concerned with appearances and what the neighbors might think, suggested quietly that perhaps Richard's offer wasn't so unreasonable, that I might consider all the options. The argument that followed was the worst I'd ever witnessed between them. It ended with my father slamming out of the house and my mother locking herself in their bedroom. I sat at the kitchen table until dawn, a cold cup of tea before me, feeling my world contract to a single point of clarity. I was essentially alone in this. My father returned the next morning, still angry but with a layer of resignation settling over him. He hadn't gone to the Bradshaws after all. "Their house has a gate," he said simply. And in those 5 words, I heard everything about the unbridgeable distance between our worlds. 2 weeks later, Richard's family lawyer called. The offer had increased to $20,000, a fortune to someone in my position, with the same conditions. I refused again. The lawyer's tone turned menacing, suggesting that if I pursued paternity, the Bradshaw family would question my character, imply I'd been promiscuous, perhaps even suggest I was looking for a wealthy target to exploit. "The Bradshaws are respected in this community," he reminded me. "Richard has a promising future. Consider carefully whether you want to embark on an ugly legal battle you're certain to lose." I hung up and cried for hours, not for the loss of Richard, whose true character had revealed itself all too clearly, but for my child, who deserved better than a father who would deny their existence. My pregnancy progressed. Morning sickness kept me from working my shifts at Denny's for several weeks, and I was let go. The bar where I worked evenings wasn't keen on having a visibly pregnant bartender, so those hours were cut too. I deferred my enrollment at the community college, telling myself it was just temporary, that I'd go back once things settled. My parents' response continued to diverge. My father was supportive but quiet, working double shifts at the mill to help with what he called the baby fund. My mother vacillated between practical help, scheduling my doctor's appointments, buying secondhand baby items, and recriminations about my poor choices and how I'd thrown away my future. At 5 months pregnant, I was showing obviously when I ran into Richard's mother, Elizabeth Bradshaw, at the grocery store. I was working as a cashier by then, the only job I'd been able to find, and she appeared in my checkout line, apparently not having noticed who was behind the register until it was too late to change lanes gracefully. She placed her items on the belt: imported cheese, organic grapes, a bottle of wine that cost more than I made in 2 hours, and studiously avoided looking at my face or my protruding belly. I rang up her purchases in silence, feeling both invisible and hypervisible simultaneously. As I handed her the receipt, I gathered my courage. "Mrs. Bradshaw, I'm carrying your grandchild. Regardless of what Richard has told you, this baby deserves to know its father and its family." Her eyes, so like Richard's, finally met mine. "My son tells me the child might not be his, that you were seeing other people." She picked up her grocery bag. "If you continue with these claims, we will be forced to defend his reputation. I don't think you want that kind of scrutiny, do you, Miss Brennan?" The lie, Richard's lie, left me breathless. Not only had he rejected our child, but he'd slandered me to protect himself. "That's not true," I managed to say, aware of the line forming behind her, of my supervisor watching with narrowed eyes. "It would be your word against his," she said, echoing her son's threat. Then lowering her voice, "The offer still stands, though not indefinitely. I suggest you reconsider while it's still available. Having a child is expensive, and your situation seems precarious." She left, the automatic doors whispering closed behind her, leaving me shaking with rage and humiliation. I excused myself for a bathroom break and sat in a stall for 10 minutes, breathing deeply, fighting nausea that had nothing to do with pregnancy. By the time Emily was born, the traumatic birth that left me with the scar I'd just shown her, Richard had moved to Philadelphia to work at his family company's headquarters. He didn't come to the hospital. He didn't call. His family's lawyer sent a final offer, $30,000 and a binding non-disclosure agreement, which was delivered to me while I was still in the recovery room, my newborn daughter sleeping in the bassinet beside me, my body broken and stitched back together. I sent it back unsigned, with a photo of Emily attached, and a note that read, "This is your granddaughter. Her name is Emily Catherine Brennan. She has your eyes." I never received a response. Emily stared at me across the kitchen table, her tea untouched. "So Dad denied you were pregnant? That's why you kept me from him?" I sighed, recognizing Richard's narrative at work. "I never kept you from him, Emily. He kept himself from you. He denied you were his until you were 8 years old." I fell in love with Emily the moment they placed her in my arms. All 6 pounds, 2 ounces of her, red-faced and squalling, her tiny fists punching the air as if protesting the indignity of birth. Despite the pain radiating through my body, despite the doctor's hushed concerns about my blood pressure, despite being completely alone, except for a nurse who kept checking her watch, I felt a fierce joy unlike anything I'd known before. "Hello, little warrior," I whispered, counting her fingers and toes, marveling at the perfection of her tiny ears, the surprising strength of her grip when she wrapped her hand around my finger. "It's just you and me now, but that's okay. We're going to be amazing together." The early days were a blur of exhaustion and wonder. I moved back in with my parents after the hospital. My dreams of independence temporarily surrendered to practical necessity. My father converted the small den into a nursery, painting it yellow, because we couldn't afford the pink I'd wanted. My mother, despite her initial disappointment, became a dedicated grandmother, watching Emily while I worked whatever jobs I could find. When Emily was 3 months old, I got hired as a receptionist at a dental office, my first job with actual benefits. The pay was minimal, but it came with health insurance that covered Emily's checkups and vaccinations. I worked Monday through Friday, dropping Emily at my parents' house at 7:30 each morning, picking her up at 5:30 each evening, then often working weekend shifts at a local diner to make ends meet. My social life evaporated. Friends from high school were in college or starting careers, going to bars and concerts, dating, living the lives of normal 20-somethings. I was changing diapers, worrying about formula costs, falling asleep over textbooks as I tried to take one community college course per semester to keep my educational dreams on life support. But there were moments of such transcendent joy that I couldn't regret the path I'd taken, difficult as it was. Emily's first smile, a gummy, lopsided grin that appeared one morning as I sang off-key while changing her diaper. Her first steps, taken from my father's outstretched hands to mine, her face a mixture of determination and delight. The way she'd babble earnestly in her car seat, carrying on complicated conversations in a language only she understood. When she was 2, she went through a phase of calling everyone Dada, the checkout clerk at the grocery store, the mailman, the elderly woman who lived next door. It broke my heart every time, though I never showed it. Instead, I'd gently correct her. "That's Mr. Peterson, sweetie. Can you say Peterson?" I created elaborate stories about her father, that he was a pilot, always flying somewhere far away, that he was a scientist working on important discoveries, that he loved her very much, but couldn't be with us. I couldn't bear for her to know the truth. I read to her every night, no matter how exhausted I was. Goodnight Moon, The Very Hungry Caterpillar, Where the Wild Things Are. I knew them all by heart. When she was older, we graduated to chapter books. Charlotte's Web, The Secret Garden, all the Ramona Quimby adventures. Sometimes I'd fall asleep before she did, the book slipping from my hands, and I'd wake to find her tucking the blanket around me, her small face serious with responsibility. When Emily was 4, my father died suddenly, a heart attack at work. The loss was devastating. He'd been my steadfast supporter, the one who never made me feel that Emily was a mistake, who'd built her first big girl bed by hand because we couldn't afford to buy one. After the funeral, I found a savings account he'd set up for Emily's education, nearly $3,000 squirreled away from his modest paychecks, a fortune from a man who rarely had more than $20 in his wallet. His death forced another change. My mother couldn't afford to keep the house on her widow's pension, and I couldn't afford to support all 3 of us on my receptionist's salary. We sold the house and split the modest proceeds. My mother moved to Allentown to live with her sister. Emily and I moved to a 1-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of Scranton, where rent was cheaper but the schools were questionable. I slept on a pull-out sofa in the living room, giving Emily the bedroom, because I wanted her to have one thing that was wholly hers in our pared-down life. I painted her name on the door with purple sparkle paint from the dollar store, hung fairy lights around the windows. and found a second-hand canopy bed frame that I refinished during nap times and late nights. When she started kindergarten, I would wake at 5 a.m. to make her lunch, always with a note tucked inside, a drawing or a joke or a simple "Mommy loves you," before getting her dressed and fed, and to the bus stop by 7:15. Then I'd rush to work, counting the hours until I could pick her up from after-school care, eager to hear about her day, to know who she played with, what she learned, whether she ate the carrot sticks I'd packed. She rarely did. There were hard times, months when I had to juggle which bills to pay, weeks when we ate pasta with butter and frozen vegetables for dinner every night, because it was all we could afford. The winter, our heat went out and we slept in the same bed under every blanket we owned, reading stories by flashlight and pretending we were explorers in the Arctic. The Easter, I couldn't afford a new dress for her to wear to church, so I stayed up all night remaking one of my old blouses into a frilly confection that made her twirl with delight. When Emily was 7, I finally finished my associate's degree in medical office administration, 5 years after I'd intended to complete a nursing program. The graduation ceremony was small, held in the community college gymnasium. Emily sat between my mother and my friend Jen, holding a bouquet of carnations she'd picked out herself, beaming with pride as if I'd won a Nobel Prize. "That's my mom," I heard her tell the older woman sitting next to them, pointing at me as I crossed the stage. "She's the smartest person in the whole world." That night, after I tucked her into bed, I found a card she'd made with construction paper and crayons. "Congratulations, Mom," it read in wobbly letters. "You're the best mom, and the best student, and the best everything." Inside was a drawing of the two of us holding hands, enormous smiles on our stick figure faces, standing beside what appeared to be our apartment building with a rainbow overhead. I sat on the edge of her bed, watching her sleep, the card clutched to my chest, overwhelmed by love for this little person who had given my life purpose and direction when I might otherwise have drifted. Yes, raising her alone was hard. Yes, there were sacrifices and struggles. But in that moment, I couldn't imagine any achievement greater than being her mother, any joy more complete than watching her grow. With my new degree, I was able to get a better job at Scranton Medical Center as a billing specialist. Still not the nursing career I'd once imagined, but a significant step up in salary and status. We moved to a 2-bedroom apartment in a slightly better neighborhood, close enough to a decent elementary school that Emily could walk there on nice days, with me watching from the window until she turned the corner. For her 8th birthday, I saved for months to throw her first real party. Not just cake at our apartment with my mother and Jen, but a proper celebration at the local skating rink with classmates and balloons and a store-bought cake with her name and icing. I worked extra shifts, sold some of my mother's jewelry that had come to me after her death, ate ramen noodles for lunch for weeks to afford it. The day of the party, as I was helping Emily lace up her rental skates, a man walked into the rink, tall, well-dressed, unmistakably Richard. He stood just inside the door, scanning the room until he spotted us, then walked directly over. "Hello, Katie," he said, as casually as if we'd seen each other yesterday instead of 8 years ago. Then he crouched down to Emily's level. "And you must be Emily. I've been looking forward to meeting you." Emily looked at him curiously, then at me for explanation. Before I could gather my thoughts, Richard continued, "I'm your dad, Emily. I'm sorry it's taken me so long to find you." The world seemed to tilt beneath me. Emily's friends were arriving. Parents were looking on curiously. The skating rink attendant was calling for the birthday group to assemble for instruction. "How did you know we'd be here?" I managed to ask. Richard straightened, adjusting his expensive suit jacket. "I hired someone to find you. They've been keeping me updated. I know I've missed a lot, but I want to make it right." "Now?" I hissed, gesturing to the children gathering nearby. "You want to do this now, at her birthday party?" He had the grace to look slightly abashed. I thought it would be a good surprise, a birthday present she'd never forget. And just like that, Richard Bradshaw waltzed back into our lives, casting himself as the long-lost father. The prodigal parent returned, bearing gifts and apologies and promises. He told Emily he'd been working overseas, that he hadn't known how to find us, that he'd never stopped looking. He said nothing about denying her existence, about the lawyers, about the years of absence. Emily, 8 years old, and desperately curious about the father I'd described in increasingly elaborate fairy tales, was instantly entranced. Richard stayed for the entire party, paid for upgraded party packages, bought extra presents, and charmed the parents of Emily's friends with stories of his international business successes. When he left, he pressed his business card into my hand. "I want to be part of her life, Katie. I've grown up. I've changed. I'll provide child support, whatever you need. Just don't keep me from her anymore." The rewriting of history had begun, subtle at first, then increasingly blatant as the years passed. Richard, who had denied Emily was his daughter, now claimed I had hidden her from him. Richard, who had offered money to make us disappear, now positioned himself as the generous provider, the father who would give Emily everything I couldn't. And Emily, young enough to be dazzled by his gifts and attention, but old enough to notice the differences between our lives, began to see him as the parent who said yes, while I was the one who had to say no. The parent who took her shopping for whatever she wanted while I enforced budgets. The parent who promised trips to Disney World while I explained why we had to prioritize saving for college. The truth, that I had raised her alone for 8 years, that I had sacrificed everything to give her stability and love, that Richard had wanted no part of her until she was a charming child rather than a demanding infant, became increasingly obscured by his elaborate alternative narrative and the material advantages he could provide. Emily looked at me across the kitchen table, her expression a mixture of confusion and lingering anger. "Why didn't you ever tell me this? About Dad denying I was his? About the lawyers? All of it? What would have been the point?" I asked quietly. "By the time you were old enough to understand, Richard was already Dad to you. Would it have helped you to know he'd rejected you initially? That he'd accused me of lying about your paternity? I wanted you to have a father who loved you, even if the story of how he came into your life wasn't exactly as he presented it." She stirred her cold tea, not meeting my eyes. "So you let me believe you were the one keeping us apart. You let me think you were jealous of him, that you resented his success. I thought having a relationship with your father, even an imperfect one, even one built on a sanitized version of the past, was better than having none at all. Maybe I was wrong." I reached across the table, stopping just short of touching her hand. "But everything I've ever done, Emily, every choice I've made, has been with one goal: protecting you from pain." The breaking point came 3 days after Emily's college graduation. She had earned her journalism degree from Temple with honors, and I had never been prouder. I sat in the audience during the ceremony, tears streaming down my face as she crossed the stage, remembering the little girl who used to create newspapers about our apartment building, interviewing neighbors about their cats and cooking recipes. Richard was there too, of course, in the VIP seating section with his new wife Vanessa, who was only 12 years older than Emily. They'd flown in from their vacation home in Aspen, specially for the ceremony, arriving in a chauffeured car that probably cost more than my monthly salary. After the ceremony, we had agreed to meet for a celebration dinner. Richard had made reservations at Le Bernardin, one of Philadelphia's most exclusive restaurants. I had saved for months to buy a new dress for the occasion, wanting to look appropriate for such a fancy place, not wanting Emily to be embarrassed by me. I arrived first, nervous but excited, clutching a small gift bag containing a vintage Montblanc pen I'd found at an estate sale and had refurbished, a proper tool for a serious journalist. The maitre d' looked me up and down, taking in my department store dress and scuffed purse, before asking for the name on the reservation. "Bradshaw," I said, feeling irrationally guilty, as if I were claiming an identity not rightfully mine. "Richard Bradshaw." He consulted his list, then smiled thinly. "Ah, yes, the Bradshaw party. I'm afraid they've already arrived and been seated. Follow me, please." I trailed him through the elegant dining room, past tables of well-heeled patrons, feeling increasingly out of place. Finally, I spotted them. Richard, Vanessa, Emily, and several other people I didn't recognize. As I approached, I realized they were Richard's business associates and their spouses, all in formal attire, champagne flutes in hand. Emily saw me first, her expression flickering briefly with something like guilt before she composed her features. "Mom, you're here." Richard turned, raising his glass. "Katie, there you are. We were beginning to think you wouldn't make it." "The invitation said 7 o'clock, I said, checking my watch. "It's only 6:50. Did it? Must have been a miscommunication. We told everyone else 6:30. He gestured vaguely to an empty chair wedged in at the corner of the table, clearly added as an afterthought. "Have a seat. We've already ordered appetizers." I sat, feeling wrong-footed and unwelcome. The conversation resumed around me. talk of stock options and vacation properties, inside jokes about people I didn't know. Emily participated easily, familiar with Richard's world in a way I never would be. A waiter appeared at my elbow. "Would you care for something to drink, ma'am?" Before I could answer, Richard interjected, "Bring her a house white. Katie's not much of a wine connoisseur." He winked at me as if we were sharing a joke, but the condescension was palpable. I wanted to contradict him, to order something else, but I didn't know enough about fine wines to make a confident selection. So I sat silently, accepting the glass of mediocre white wine when it arrived, listening as Richard regaled the table with stories about Emily's childhood, events he hadn't witnessed, milestones he'd missed, all recounted as if he'd been there for every moment. "Remember when you won the spelling bee in 4th grade?" he said to Emily. "You were so nervous, but I told you. Bradshaws don't get stage fright." I gripped my wine glass tighter. I was the one who had helped Emily practice spelling words every night for weeks before that competition. I was the one who had sewn a special dress for the occasion because she'd outgrown her good clothes, and payday was still a week away. I was the one who had sat in the audience, heart in my throat, as she correctly spelled phenomenon for the win. Richard had sent a congratulatory text message 2 days later, when he remembered to check in. The waiter returned to take our orders. When it came to my turn, I hesitated, scanning the menu with mounting horror at the prices. I had budgeted for an expensive meal, but not this expensive. "I think I'll just have the soup," I said quietly. Richard laughed. "Don't be ridiculous, Katie. This is a celebration. She'll have the salmon," he told the waiter, then turned to the table at large. "Katie's always been so frugal. It's admirable, really, how she manages on her little salary." Humiliation burned through me. Emily looked uncomfortable, but said nothing to defend me. The others at the table regarded me with that particular blend of pity and disinterest, reserved for those deemed unimportant. Throughout the meal, Richard continued to position himself as the primary parent in Emily's life, the architect of her success. When Emily was deciding on colleges, he told one of his colleagues, I said to her, "Only consider the top tier. I didn't build my business by settling for second best." Boom! No mention of the fact that I was the one who had driven Emily to campus tours at state schools and helped her apply for scholarships. No acknowledgement that his generosity in paying for Temple had come years after I'd established the college fund with my father's money, added to monthly with whatever I could spare. When dessert arrived, Richard stood and raised his glass. "I'd like to propose a toast to my brilliant daughter, Emily. From the moment she was born, I knew she was destined for greatness." My hands shook so badly I had to set down my water glass. From the moment she was born? He hadn't even acknowledged her existence until she was 8 years old. Emily has my drive, my intellect, and thankfully my height. This earned appreciative chuckles from the table. As she embarks on her career in journalism, I have no doubt she'll make the Bradshaw name proud. Bradshaw name? She was Emily Brennan on her birth certificate, on her diploma, on every school record and medical form I'd ever filled out. Richard had never even suggested she take his surname. After the toast, as conversation resumed around the table, Emily leaned over to me. "Mom, are you okay? You've barely touched your food." "I'm fine," I lied, pushing salmon around my plate. "Just a little tired." Richard overheard. "Katie's never had much stamina for late nights," he said to Vanessa, who smiled politely. "When Emily was little, I'd often take her for weekends so Katie could catch up on her sleep. That was the final straw. This complete fabrication of history, this theft of the years I'd spent as Emily's only parent, presented so casually as fact in front of my daughter and strangers." I stood abruptly, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. "That's not true," I said, my voice shaking but clear. "You never took Emily for weekends when she was little. You weren't there." A hush fell over the table. Richard's expression hardened, then quickly reset to one of patient indulgence. "Katie, this isn't the time or place for one of your episodes." "Episodes?" I repeated incredulously. "Is that what you call it when I object to you rewriting our daughter's childhood?" Emily tugged at my arm, her face flushed with embarrassment. "Mom, please sit down. People are staring." "Let them stare," I said, beyond caring about appearances. "Your father has been lying about his role in your life since the day he reappeared at your 8th birthday party. He's created this fiction where he was always the devoted dad, and I'm sick of it." Richard's colleagues were watching with undisguised fascination. Vanessa studied her manicure, clearly uncomfortable. Richard himself maintained his composed expression, though a muscle twitched in his jaw. "Katie," he said in the tone one might use to address a difficult child, "you're making a scene. If you're feeling unwell, perhaps you should go home. We can discuss this another time." "No," I said, surprising myself with my firmness. "We'll discuss it now. You want to toast to Emily's birth? You weren't there. You refused to acknowledge her as your child. You offered me money to keep her existence a secret." Emily stood then too, her face pale. "What are you talking about?" Richard laughed, a hollow sound. "Your mother has always had an active imagination, Emily. You know that. Tell her," I demanded, beyond caring about protecting Emily from painful truths, beyond caring about anything except setting the record straight. "Tell her how you denied she was yours. Tell her about the lawyers you sent. Tell her how you threatened me if I tried to establish paternity." The maitre d' appeared at Richard's elbow, murmuring discreetly about disturbing other diners. Richard nodded, then turned to me with cold eyes. "I think you should leave, Katie. You're clearly not well." "Mom," Emily pleaded, "just sit down. We can talk about this later." I looked at my daughter, my beautiful, accomplished daughter who had believed Richard's version of events for so long that the truth sounded like madness to her. I saw in her eyes that she had already chosen sides, that anything I said now would only cement her belief that I was bitter, jealous, unstable. "Congratulations on your graduation, Emily," I said quietly, placing the gift bag with the pen on the table. "I'm very proud of you." Then I walked out of the restaurant, away from the pitying glances and whispered comments, away from Richard's smug certainty that he would be believed over me, away from my daughter's embarrassment at her mother's public breakdown. Outside, it was raining, a gentle spring shower that masked my tears as I walked aimlessly, my new dress growing increasingly sodden, my carefully styled hair plastered to my face. I had no destination in mind, no plan beyond escaping the suffocating humiliation of that dining room. My phone rang several times. Emily, then Jen, whom Emily had apparently called to check on me. I turned it off, unable to face either concern or accusation. Eventually, I found myself at the 30th Street station, watching trains arrive and depart, people embracing in reunion or farewell. I sat on a bench until midnight, contemplating how easy it would be to board a train to anywhere, to start over somewhere my history wasn't constantly rewritten by someone with more money and power than I had. But I didn't, because regardless of what Emily believed about me, regardless of how thoroughly Richard had corrupted our story, I was still her mother. I would always be her mother. And mothers don't abandon their children, even adult children who have hurt them deeply. So I went home to my apartment, soaked and heartbroken, and waited for Emily to reach out when she was ready. She didn't call the next day, or the day after. A week passed, then 2. I learned from Jen, who remained friends with both of us, that Emily had accepted a position at a digital media company in New York, a job Richard had helped her secure through connections. When she finally called, nearly a month after the disastrous dinner, her voice was formal, distant. "I'm moving to New York next week. I thought you should know." "That's wonderful news about the job," I said, swallowing past the lump in my throat. "Can I help you pack, or drive you there?" "No need. Dad's hired movers and he and Vanessa are driving up with me." A pause. "About what happened at the restaurant?" I waited, hope fluttering weakly that she might have questioned Richard's version of events, might have considered there was some truth to what I'd said. "I think you should talk to someone, Mom. Dad says he knows a good therapist in Scranton. He's willing to pay for it." The hope died. Of course, Richard would position my outburst as a mental health crisis rather than a justified reaction to his lies. Of course he would offer to pay for help, casting himself as the magnanimous ex while further undermining my credibility. "I don't need a therapist, Emily," I said wearily. "I need you to consider that your father might not be telling the whole truth about the past." "See? That's exactly what I'm talking about," she replied, frustration evident. "This constant suspicion, this bitterness toward Dad. It's not healthy, Mom." I closed my eyes, recognizing the futility of arguing. "I love you, Emily. I'm proud of you. I hope you'll be very happy in New York." "Thanks," she said, her tone softening slightly. "I'll call when I'm settled." But her calls became increasingly infrequent and brief. When I visited her in New York, she was always busy, our time together scheduled in between more important engagements. When she came to Scranton, she stayed with Richard's family, not with me. The distance between us grew, fed by Richard's ongoing narrative that I was emotionally unstable, unreasonably jealous of his success, unable to accept that Emily had opportunities beyond what I could provide. And now, 3 years later, she sat across from my kitchen table, having shown up unannounced to accuse me of never loving her, of resenting her existence, of holding her back from the life she could have had. The final betrayal. That, after everything, after all the sacrifices and struggles and love, she could believe I had never wanted her, never loved her. "You never loved me," she had shouted, the words cutting deeper than any physical wound ever could. That's when I showed her my scar, the physical evidence of the moment I had chosen her life over my own, the permanent mark of the most profound love I had ever known. And even that, she had dismissed as manipulation. I sat across from my daughter, watching the play of emotions across her face as I recounted the truth of our shared history. Doubt, confusion, flashes of anger, moments of realization, all visible in her expressive eyes, so like her father's in shape but with my tendency to reveal every thought. Something shifted inside me as I spoke, a quiet but seismic realignment. For 16 years, since Richard had reappeared at that skating rink, I had allowed him to control the narrative of our family. I had bitten my tongue when he claimed credit for my parenting, stayed silent when he rewrote history, accepted being cast as the lesser parent, all because I believed it was best for Emily to have a relationship with her father, even one built on carefully constructed fictions. I had prioritized Emily's happiness over the truth, over my own dignity, over justice. And where had it gotten us? To this kitchen table, with my daughter believing I had never loved her. "There's something else you should see," I said, rising from the table. My legs felt unsteady, but my resolve was suddenly ironclad. "Wait here." I went to my bedroom and opened the bottom drawer of my dresser, the place where I kept the tangible pieces of our history that didn't fit with Richard's sanitized version. I removed the false bottom I'd installed years ago and took out a manila envelope, yellowed with age. Back in the kitchen, Emily was texting someone, probably her father. She looked up guiltily when I returned, quickly putting her phone away. "What's that?" she asked, eyeing the envelope. I sat down and removed its contents. The original paternity test I'd finally managed to get when Emily was 9, after Richard had reappeared and I wanted legal documentation of his obligations. Copies of the settlement offers his lawyers had sent when I was pregnant. The certified letter I'd sent to the Bradshaw home announcing Emily's birth. Returned unopened. Photographs of our life before Richard. Emily's first steps, her preschool graduation, the tiny apartment we'd shared, the two of us at my community college graduation. "This is our real story," I said, spreading the items between us. "Not the one your father created." Emily picked up the paternity test, scanning it with journalist's eyes, noting the dates, the official stamps. She set it down and reached for one of the settlement offers, her expression hardening as she read the cold legal language offering money in exchange for her erasure. "These could be fake," she said finally, but there was uncertainty in her voice. "They're not, and you know they're not." I pushed the returned birth announcement toward her. "Why would I fake this? What would be the point after all these years?" She stared at the envelope with its multiple return to sender stamps, then at the photos of our early life together, images that had never appeared in the carefully curated family narrative Richard had constructed. "I don't understand," she said, picking up a picture of herself at age 3, sitting on my lap at the community pool, both of us squinting into the sun. "If all this is true, why didn't you fight harder? Why didn't you take Dad to court, make him pay child support, tell everyone what he'd done?" The question struck me as both heartbreakingly naive and profoundly insightful. Why hadn't I fought harder? The answers were complex. Fear of Richard's wealth and power, exhaustion from the daily struggle of single parenthood, a desire to protect Emily from painful truths. But underlying all those reasons was a deeper truth I had never fully acknowledged, because I believed, on some level, that I deserved it. I said quietly, that I wasn't entitled to demand better treatment, for myself or for you, that keeping the peace was more important than standing up for the truth. Emily stared at me, this new perspective clearly unsettling her. "That doesn't sound like you," I laughed, a short, surprised sound. Doesn't it? Think about it, Emily. When has your mother ever put herself first? When have I ever demanded the recognition I deserved? The respect, the support. I've spent your entire life accommodating, compromising, stepping back so others could step forward. You make it sound like martyrdom, she said, a hint of her earlier anger returning. Not martyrdom, survival. I picked up a photo of us in our first apartment, Emily on my hip, both of us thin but smiling. I was 19 when you were born. Your father was from a powerful family that made it clear they would crush me if I challenged them. I had no resources, no leverage, so I focused on what I could control, giving you the best life possible with what I had. But after Dad came back when I was older, you could have told me then. Could I? I set the photo down carefully. You adored him from the moment he appeared. He gave you everything I couldn't. Expensive gifts, trips, connections. Would you really have believed me over him? Or would you have seen it as jealousy, as trying to come between you? She didn't answer, which was answer enough. Besides, I continued, by then, the pattern was set. I had spent 8 years being both parents to you, handling everything alone. When Richard decided to play father, I paused, the revelation crystallizing as I spoke it. I thought I was finally getting a break, that someone was finally sharing the load. I didn't realize he was only interested in the fun parts, the glory, the credit. Emily was quiet for a long moment, looking at the evidence of our past spread across the table. Outside, the snow had stopped, leaving a pristine white blanket over the yard. The kitchen felt unnaturally quiet, as if the house itself were holding its breath. "Why are you showing me all this now?" she finally asked. "After all these years?" I met her gaze directly. "Because I'm done being erased. I'm done letting your father's money and charm rewrite our history. I'm done sacrificing my truth to protect his image." The words came from someplace deep inside me, a well of certainty I hadn't known was there. As I spoke them, I felt something uncoil within my chest. A tension I'd carried for so long I'd forgotten it wasn't a natural part of my body. When you accused me of never loving you, the most untrue thing anyone has ever said about me, something broke. But not in the way you might think. I leaned forward, holding her gaze. It broke me free from caring what Richard thinks of me, free from worrying that standing up for myself might damage your relationship with him, free from the fear that the truth would hurt you more than the lies. Emily looked away, her fingers tracing the edge of one of the photos. "I don't know what to believe anymore. Believe the evidence in front of you," I said simply. "Believe your own memories, not just the narrative your father has constructed. Think about who was there for the ordinary moments, the sick days, the homework struggles, the disappointments. Think about who taught you to ride a bike, to write your name, to stand up after falling." I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the snow-covered street. In the distance, I could see the spire of the church where Emily had been baptized, where I had sat alone in the front pew, holding my baby while the priest spoke of community and family support that was conspicuously absent. "I'm not asking you to cut your father out of your life," I said without turning. "I'm not even asking you to confront him about the past. I'm just asking you to acknowledge the truth of our story, your story, and to understand that every choice I've made, from the moment I knew you existed, has been out of love for you." I turned back to face her, suddenly calm in a way I hadn't been in years. "You can be angry with me for real things, Emily. God knows I've made plenty of mistakes, but don't ever again say I didn't love you. It's the one accusation I won't tolerate, because it's the one thing in my life I know without doubt. I have loved you completely, constantly, sometimes imperfectly, but always with everything I have." Emily looked up at me, her eyes swimming with tears. She opened her mouth to speak, then closed it again, overwhelmed. I walked back to the table and began gathering the documents and photos, returning them to the envelope. "Think about what I've shown you. Take your time. I'm not going anywhere." As I slid the last photo into the envelope, Emily at her high school graduation, me standing beside her with naked pride on my face, Richard nowhere in sight though he'd claimed in later retellings to have been front and center, I felt a strange lightness. For the first time in 16 years, I had spoken the whole truth without filtering it through concern for Emily's relationship with her father, without fear of Richard's retaliation, without doubt about my right to my own history. Whatever Emily decided to believe, whatever relationship she chose to have with me going forward, I had reclaimed my narrative. I had remembered my own worth. I had awakened from the long compromise of silence. I need some air, Emily said suddenly, standing up. I need to think. I nodded. Take all the time you need. She gathered her coat and purse, movements jerky with emotion. At the door, she paused, looking back at me. For what it's worth, she said quietly. I never really believed you didn't love me. I was just hurt and confused. I know, I said, because I did. I recognized in her the same tendency I'd always had, to lash out at the safe person, the one who would still be there after the storm had passed. I had been that person for her entire life, the emotional home base she could always return to, no matter how far she strayed. After she left, I washed our mugs, wiped down the table, and opened the windows to let fresh air into the kitchen despite the winter chill. Physical actions to match the emotional clearing that had taken place. I felt surprisingly peaceful, as if something long infected had finally been lanced, allowing healing to begin. I didn't know if Emily would come back today, or tomorrow, or next week. I didn't know if she would confront her father, or continue to accept his version of events alongside the truth I'd shown her. I didn't know if our relationship could recover from the years of Richard's subtle undermining, from the accusations she'd hurled at me today. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I would never again allow anyone, not Richard, not Emily, not even myself, to diminish the truth of what I had done, what I had sacrificed, what I had built. I would never again shrink myself to make room for Richard's ego or to shield Emily from difficult realities. I was Catherine Brennan, and I had raised an extraordinary daughter against incredible odds. That was my truth, my achievement, my legacy, regardless of who acknowledged it. 2 days after our confrontation, Emily returned. She looked tired, her usual polished appearance slightly frayed at the edges, hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, minimal makeup, wearing jeans and a sweater rather than her typical professional attire. I was surprised to see her so soon. I'd expected a longer cooling-off period, perhaps even weeks of silence. I opened the door wider, wordlessly inviting her in from the cold. I've been doing some research, she said without preamble, setting her laptop bag on the kitchen table. I am a journalist, after all. I put on the kettle, giving her space to continue at her own pace. I went to the county records office, she said, unzipping her bag, and I found some interesting documents. She pulled out several folders and spread them on the table. Legal papers I'd never seen before, property records, old newspaper clippings. What is all this? I asked, setting mugs of tea before us. The truth, she said simply. Or at least, more of it than either of us knew. She opened the first folder, revealing court documents from 24 years ago, around the time I was pregnant with her. Did you know that Grandpa Bradshaw forced Dad to sign over partial ownership of his trust fund to him when he found out about me? She pushed the papers toward me. There was a morality clause. Dad didn't just deny you because he was young and scared. He stood to lose millions. I scanned the documents, legal language swimming before my eyes. How did you get these? A small, satisfied smile. I told the clerk I was researching Bradshaw Business Holdings for a potential investment article. It's amazing what people will share with a press badge. She tapped another folder. But that's not the interesting part. Look at these property records. She opened the folder to reveal deeds and transfer documents for a small property in the Poconos, a cabin on a few acres of land. This property was purchased by Richard Bradshaw Sr. in 1999, the year I was born. It was later transferred to a trust, with you and me named as beneficiaries. She looked at me intently. Did you know about this? I shook my head, genuinely confused. No, I never received any notification, because the trustee was Elizabeth Bradshaw, Dad's mother. She was supposed to inform you when I turned 18, but she never did. Emily's expression hardened. She died last year. That's probably the only reason I was able to find these records. The trust has been in administrative limbo. My mind raced. But why would Richard's father set up a trust for us without telling me? That's where these come in, Emily said, opening the third folder to reveal yellowed newspaper clippings and what appeared to be photocopies of private correspondence. I found these in Grandma Helen's personal effects. She kept a file on you. I picked up one of the clippings, a small article from the Scranton Times about my community college graduation, with a photo of me in my cap and gown, Emily beside me. Another was a program from Emily's elementary school spelling bee, with her name highlighted. There were report cards, dance recital programs, even a copy of the birth announcement I'd sent that had been returned unopened. She was keeping tabs on us, I whispered, oddly touched despite everything. But why? Emily pulled out a letter, handwritten on expensive stationery. This is from Grandpa Bradshaw to Grandma, dated about a month before he died, when I was 6. Read it. I picked up the letter with trembling fingers. My dear Elizabeth, as my time grows short, I find myself preoccupied with the matter of our granddaughter. Yes, Elizabeth, our granddaughter, regardless of your persistent denial. The private investigator's reports and photographs leave no doubt. The child has Richard's eyes, my mother's chin, your elegance even at such a young age. I have made arrangements for the Brennan girl and her mother. The property at Lakeview is being transferred to a trust in their names, with you as trustee. It is not enough to compensate for our family's shameful behavior, but it is what I can do without directly opposing your wishes during my final days. When you are ready to acknowledge the truth, I hope you will do what is right by them. The girl, Emily, deserves to know her family history, her birthright, and from all reports, her mother has shown remarkable character and resilience in raising her alone. I regret many things as I face the end, Elizabeth, but none more than allowing you and our son to turn away from our responsibilities in this matter. It seems the Brennan woman, with all her limited resources, has demonstrated more integrity than the entire Bradshaw family. With enduring love despite our differences, Robert I set the letter down, overwhelmed. All these years, I'd believed the entire Bradshaw family had rejected Emily, had seen her as an inconvenience, an embarrassment, a threat to their carefully constructed social standing. To discover that Robert Bradshaw had recognized her, had tried in his way to provide for us, was staggering. There's more, Emily said quietly. Another letter, from Grandma Helen to Dad, never sent. She handed me another sheet of paper, this one a sharper photocopy, the handwriting more angular and controlled than Robert's flowing script. Richard, your father is gone. The doctors say it was his heart, but I believe it was regret that finally killed him. Regret over your actions and my complicity in them. He made provisions for your daughter and her mother, a small property, some investments. I have not informed them as he wished. Perhaps this is my final act of protection for you, though I am increasingly uncertain whether you deserve it. I have seen the reports, the photographs. The girl is thriving despite your absence, despite our rejection. Her mother has done what you would not, accepted responsibility, made sacrifices, built a life centered around love rather than convenience. I will continue to honor your wishes and keep my distance from them. But know this, your father was right. You have shirked a sacred obligation, and someday you will face the consequences of that choice. If you have any of your father's character in you, you will find it within yourself to acknowledge your daughter before it is too late. Mother, I looked up at Emily, connecting dots that had been invisible until now. This letter was written right before your 8th birthday, when Richard suddenly reappeared. Emily nodded. I think Grandma finally gave him the letter after keeping it for almost 2 years. I found a note in her calendar that they had dinner alone on May 14th, 2007. My birthday party was 3 weeks later. So he didn't just randomly decide to find us? I said slowly. He was pushed by his mother, by guilt over his father's final wishes, and by money, Emily added. I found amendments to the trust. If Dad didn't acknowledge me by my 10th birthday, control of his entire inheritance would revert to the family foundation. Millions of dollars were at stake. The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. Richard's sudden reappearance, his elaborate story about having searched for us, his immediate generosity, none of it had been motivated by paternal love or personal growth. It had been a calculated business decision, prompted by his mother's ultimatum and the threat of financial consequences. Do you think he ever cared about me at all? Emily asked, her voice small, suddenly sounding very young. Or was I just a box to check to secure his inheritance? I reached across the table and took her hand. Whatever Richard had done to me, however much he had rewritten our history to cast himself as the hero, I couldn't bring myself to destroy Emily's relationship with her father entirely. I think it started that way, I said carefully, but I also think it's possible to begin something for the wrong reasons and discover genuine feelings along the way. Your father is complicated. Selfish, certainly. Opportunistic, without doubt. But I've seen him with you. The pride in his eyes can't be entirely fake. Emily squeezed my hand, then withdrew it to close the folders, aligning their edges with methodical precision. "I went to see him yesterday," she said, not looking at me. "I asked him about all of this." My breath caught. "What did he say?" "At first, he denied everything. Said you had always been jealous, bitter, that you'd poisoned me against him." She gave a short, humorless laugh. His standard script. But then I showed him the trust documents, the letters. I asked him point blank if he'd only come back into my life because of Grandpa's conditions on his inheritance. I waited, sensing she needed to tell this at her own pace. He got very quiet. Then he said, "It was more complicated than that, Emily." She finally looked up at me. He didn't deny it. He started talking about obligations to the family business, about how young and immature he'd been, about how coming back was the right thing to do regardless of his motivations. "I'm sorry," I said softly, knowing how painful this revelation must be. "Don't be," she replied, her voice stronger. For the first time in my life, I saw my father clearly, not as the hero of his own carefully constructed narrative, but as he really is, a man who's spent his entire life making choices based on what benefits him. She stood and walked to the window, looking out at the winter landscape, so much like me in that moment that it made my heart ache. "You know what the worst part is?" she continued. He still couldn't admit he was wrong. Even confronted with evidence of his lies, he tried to justify everything. He actually said, "I gave you a good life, Emily. Does it really matter why?" I joined her at the window, standing close but not touching. "And what did you say?" I said, "Yes, it matters. Truth matters." A tear slipped down her cheek, which she wiped away impatiently. Then I told him I needed some time and space to process everything. We stood in silence for a moment, watching a cardinal land on the bird feeder outside, a flash of brilliant red against the snow. "There's something else," Emily said finally. "Something I found that I don't think even Dad knows about." She returned to the table and pulled out a final folder, newer, crisper than the others. "The trust doesn't just include the cabin and the Poconos. There are investments, too. Blue-chip stocks purchased in 1999 that have been quietly growing for 24 years, with all dividends reinvested." She opened the folder to reveal financial statements. "According to my calculations, the total value is just over $2 million. I stared at the numbers, unable to comprehend their meaning in relation to my life. $2 million? Technically, it's split. $1 million for each of us. And it's ours, Mom. Legally, unquestionably ours. Elizabeth Bradshaw may have hidden it from us, but she couldn't change the terms. As of my 21st birthday, we've been the legal owners. We just didn't know it." I sank into a chair, lightheaded. $2 million. The amount that had seemed an insult when Richard's lawyers offered it to me to disappear, now represented something entirely different. Freedom, security, options I'd never allowed myself to consider. "I don't understand," I said, struggling to process. Why would Robert Bradshaw do this? He never even met us. Emily sat beside me. I think, in the end, he was trying to right a wrong. His letter suggests he knew what Richard and Elizabeth had done wasn't just unfair to us. It was unworthy of the family name he valued so highly. "What are you going to do?" I asked, gesturing to the financial statements. "Well, first I've hired a lawyer to help us formally claim the trust assets." She smiled slightly. "I used Dad's own lawyer, ironically, told him I needed advice on a trust matter. He doesn't know the details yet. And after that," Emily took a deep breath, "I'm quitting my job at the media company." "Emily, it's not impulsive, Mom. I've been unhappy there for months. The position Dad helped me get isn't what I wanted to do with my journalism degree. It's all corporate content, branded stories, nothing substantial." Her eyes lit up with a passion I hadn't seen in years. "What I really want is to do investigative reporting. And now, with this financial cushion, I can afford to freelance while I build my portfolio." I nodded, recognizing in her the determination that had always been there, the clarity of purpose often obscured by Richard's influence and expectations. "And you?" she asked. "What will you do with your share?" The question startled me. I'd been so focused on Emily's revelations, on processing the rewriting of our history yet again, that I hadn't considered what this might mean for my own life. "I don't know," I said honestly. "I've never had the luxury of thinking beyond the next month, the next bill, the next necessary sacrifice." Emily took my hands in hers, her grip firm and warm. "Then it's time you started. You put your dreams on hold for 24 years, Mom. Maybe it's time to dust them off. I looked at my daughter, really looked at her, and saw for the first time the woman she had become. Not just the surface achievements I'd always recognized and celebrated, but something deeper, a moral compass, an ability to face difficult truths, a resilience that had always been there, but had been tested and proven in these past few days. In that moment, I understood that the greatest evidence of my success as a mother wasn't in what I had given up for her, but in who she had become despite all the complications of her beginnings. And perhaps the best thing I could do for her now wasn't to continue sacrificing, but to show her how to live fully, authentically, without apology. I always wanted to be a nurse, I said slowly, the long-abandoned dream stirring to life. Maybe it's not too late to go back to school. Emily smiled, a genuine smile that reached her eyes. It's definitely not too late. We spent the afternoon talking, really talking, in a way we hadn't in years, about her discoveries, about our past, about possible futures now suddenly within reach, about Richard too, and how to navigate a relationship with him now that the foundations had been revealed as unstable. As the winter afternoon faded to dusk, we ordered pizza and ate it at the kitchen table, reminiscing about the Friday night pizza tradition we'd had when she was in high school, the one luxury I'd allowed in our tight budget, our weekly celebration of making it through another week. I remember how you'd always give me the slices with extra cheese, Emily said, selecting a particularly cheesy piece now, the habit apparently not forgotten. And you'd always save your crusts for last, lining them up like little soldiers, I replied, smiling as she did exactly that with her first slice. We were different people than we'd been 3 days ago when she'd stormed into my kitchen with accusations. The air between us felt clearer, as if a persistent static had finally been silenced, allowing us to hear each other properly for the first time in years. I didn't delude myself that everything was resolved. We had years of Richard's influence to unpack, years of my own silence to examine, years of misunderstandings to address. But we had taken the first steps toward a more honest relationship, one built on the complete truth of our shared history, rather than the edited version Richard had scripted. And we had something else too, something neither Richard nor time nor circumstance could take away. We had evidence, tangible proof, that even in his absence, even in his denial, Emily's grandfather had seen us, had recognized our worth, had tried in his way to provide some measure of justice. It wasn't the millions that mattered, though the security they would provide was undeniable. It was the validation, the acknowledgement from beyond the grave that we had been wronged, that we deserved better, that someone had known the truth all along. As Emily gathered the folders, carefully returning them to her bag, she paused, holding the letter from Robert Bradshaw. "Can I leave these with you?" she asked. "I've made copies, but I think you should have the originals. They're part of our story." I nodded, touched by the gesture. "I'll keep them safe." "I know you will," she said. "You've always been the keeper of our real history, even when no one else acknowledged it." She hugged me before she left. A real hug, not the perfunctory embrace we'd exchanged in recent years. As I held her, feeling the solid reality of the woman who had once been the tiny baby I'd protected with my body and my life, I realized that the power I'd always had, the power Richard had never been able to diminish despite his wealth and influence, was the simple, unassailable truth of my motherhood. I had been there from the beginning. I had witnessed every first, soothed every hurt, celebrated every triumph. I had the legitimate claim to Emily's history that Richard, for all his expensive gifts and grand gestures, would never possess. And now, finally, Emily knew it too. Over the next few weeks, Emily and I worked together to claim what was rightfully ours, not just the financial assets, but our narrative, our dignity, our truth. The legal process of accessing the trust was surprisingly straightforward. Emily's lawyer, a sharp-minded woman named Vivian Chen, who had recently left Richard's firm to start her own practice, handled everything with brisk efficiency. Elizabeth Bradshaw's failure to notify us of the trust's existence was, in Vivian's words, a breach of fiduciary duty that simplifies our case considerably. Normally, there might be questions about the intent of the trust, pushback from other family members, delays, Vivian explained during our first meeting in her downtown Scranton office. But Robert Bradshaw's letter is essentially a smoking gun, clear evidence of his intentions and of Elizabeth's deliberate concealment. Will Richard be able to contest it? I asked, still wary of his influence and resources. Vivian smiled thinly. He can try. But based on these documents, he'd be fighting his own father's explicitly stated wishes. Not a good look, especially for someone of his standing in the business community. Emily, sitting beside me in the sleek leather chair that matched my own, looked determined rather than worried. I'm not concerned about Dad contesting it legally. I'm more concerned about how he'll try to spin this emotionally, the narrative he'll create. Vivian nodded approvingly. Smart. The legal battle is often easier than the personal one, but you have something powerful on your side now that you didn't before. What's that? I asked. Evidence, Vivian said simply. Cold, hard, documented evidence. It's much harder for someone to maintain a false narrative when confronted with tangible proof to the contrary. As we left the office, Emily linked her arm through mine, a gesture from childhood she'd abandoned in her teens when it had become uncool to show such affection for one's mother. I've been thinking, she said as we walked toward the parking lot. We need to be strategic about this. Dad's whole life is built around controlling narratives, protecting his image. When he realizes he can't stop us legally, he'll try other tactics. Like what? I asked, though I had my suspicions. He'll try to divide us again. He'll say I'm being manipulated, that I've been turned against him. He'll offer compromises that seem reasonable, but actually serve his interests. She stopped walking and turned to face me. And if that doesn't work, he'll probably try to buy us off, offer even more money to keep this quiet, to maintain his fiction. Her insight impressed me. Emily had always been perceptive, but seeing her apply that perception to her father's tactics showed a maturity and clarity I hadn't fully appreciated before. What do you want to do? I asked, recognizing that this needed to be her decision. I had made my peace with the truth years ago. She was just beginning to reconcile what she'd believed with what she now knew to be true. I want to be smart, she said after a moment. Not vengeful, not petty, but strategic. I don't want to destroy my relationship with Dad, but I need it to be based on honesty going forward. The next day, Emily drove to Philadelphia to meet with Richard in person. She asked me not to come. This part I need to handle alone, and I respected her decision, though I spent the day anxious and checking my phone constantly. She returned late that evening, looking drained but resolute. I made her tea and sat with her at the kitchen table that had become the scene of so many revelations. How did it go? I asked, trying to keep the worry from my voice. Emily wrapped her hands around the mug, seeking its warmth. About as I expected. Denial, then anger, then bargaining. She gave a tired smile. The stages of grief for a lie that's dying. What did he say exactly? At first, he tried to dismiss the documents, suggested they might be forged or misinterpreted. When I made it clear that wasn't going to work, he shifted to righteous indignation. How dare I go digging into private family matters? How could I betray his trust? Didn't I appreciate everything he'd done for me? She took a sip of tea. Standard Dad stuff. I nodded, recognizing the pattern from my own limited interactions with Richard over the years. Then came the bargaining. He offered to make things right with you financially. A generous settlement, he called it. If I would agree to keep the original trust private, let him handle it within the family. She set her mug down firmly. That's when I showed him my recorder and reminded him I'm a journalist. My eyes widened. You recorded the conversation? Legally, she assured me. Pennsylvania is a two-party consent state, and I told him at the beginning that I was recording for accuracy. He was so busy trying to control the narrative that he didn't even object. She pulled out her phone. I don't intend to use it publicly. That's not the point. The point was letting him know that his words have consequences, that I'm not just going to accept whatever story he decides to tell. I felt a surge of pride mixed with concern. How did he react? He got very quiet, then very reasonable, very conciliatory. Classic Dad when he realizes he's not in control. She ran a hand through her hair, a gesture she'd had since childhood when processing complex emotions. He asked what I wanted. I told him I wanted acknowledgement of the truth, not public humiliation, not revenge, just private honesty between us. And did he give it? I asked, skeptical. Partially. He admitted that he'd originally denied I was his, that he'd stayed away those first 8 years, that he'd only reconnected because of his father's trust conditions. She looked down at her hands. But he insists that he grew to love me, that his feelings now are genuine regardless of how it started. That could be true, I said carefully, still trying to protect her feelings despite everything. Emily looked up. her eyes clear and steady. Maybe, but here's what I realized today, Mom. It doesn't actually matter. Whether he loves me or not, whether his feelings are genuine, doesn't change the facts of what he did to us. It doesn't erase his lies or justify them. The maturity of her perspective struck me. This wasn't the reaction of the hurt child who'd stormed into my kitchen days ago, nor was it the blind acceptance of her father's narrative that had characterized her young adulthood. This was something new, a balanced, clear-eyed assessment that acknowledged complexity, without excusing wrongdoing. "What happens now?" I asked. "I gave him a choice," she said. "He can accept that we're claiming the trust assets that are legally ours, acknowledge privately to you that he misrepresented our history, and move forward with a more honest relationship. Or he can fight us, in which case I'll have no choice but to distance myself from him." "That's a hard line," I observed, neither approving nor disapproving. "It is," she agreed, "but I'm done with half-truths and convenient fictions. I told him I don't need him to be perfect. I just need him to be honest." She stood and stretched, fatigue evident in her movements. "He said he needs time to think about it." I gave him a week. As she headed to the guest room that had once been her childhood bedroom, she paused in the doorway. "Oh, and I quit my job today too. Gave my 2 weeks' notice." "Emily, don't worry," she said with a tired smile. "I've been thinking about it for months. This just gave me the clarity and courage to finally do it." She yawned. "We can talk about it tomorrow. I'm working on some ideas for freelance investigative pieces." After she closed her door, I sat at the kitchen table, processing the day's events. Emily was handling this with a forthrightness and integrity that both impressed and slightly intimidated me. In some ways, she was being braver than I had ever been, confronting Richard directly, setting boundaries, refusing to accept comfortable lies. The next morning, I woke early as usual and found a message from Vivian Chen. The trust assets would be released to us within 30 days. The cabin in the Poconos would require a separate property transfer, but the financial holdings would be divided and deposited into accounts being established for each of us. As I sipped my coffee by the window, watching the winter sunrise paint the snow-covered yard in shades of pink and gold, I contemplated what this meant for my future. The financial security was still difficult to fully comprehend. After decades of careful budgeting, of stretching every dollar, of lying awake, worrying about unexpected expenses, the idea that I would soon have resources beyond immediate necessity seemed almost unreal. I pulled out my laptop and did something I hadn't allowed myself to do in years. I researched nursing programs. The University of Scranton offered an accelerated BSN for students who already had some college credits. With my associate's degree and the prerequisites I'd completed years ago, I might qualify. The program was 15 months of intensive study, leading to a Bachelor of Science in nursing. My fingers hesitated over the keyboard. Was I being ridiculous? I was 43 years old. Most of my classmates would be in their 20s, perhaps even younger than Emily. Did I really want to start over at this stage of life? But was it really starting over? Or was it finally returning to the path I'd been forced to abandon when Emily was born? And wasn't there something powerful in showing Emily that it was never too late to reclaim a dream? That age wasn't a barrier to growth and change. I clicked on the request information button before I could talk myself out of it. Over breakfast, I told Emily about the message from Vivian and my tentative exploration of the nursing program. "That's amazing, Mom," she exclaimed, genuinely excited. "You'd be an incredible nurse. You've basically been practicing unofficially for years, dealing with my asthma, helping Grandma through her cancer, volunteering at those health screenings at church." Her enthusiasm bolstered my confidence. It would be a lot of work. And I'd have to quit my job at the medical center to do the accelerated program. It's too intensive to work simultaneously. "But now you can afford to," she pointed out. "That's what this money means. Not just security, but options." We spent the morning researching together, nursing programs for me, potential freelance opportunities for her. It felt strange but wonderful to be planning futures that weren't constrained by financial limitations, to be dreaming beyond immediate necessity. Around noon, Emily's phone rang. Richard. She took the call in the living room while I busied myself in the kitchen, giving her privacy while trying not to eavesdrop. When she returned, her expression was hard to read. "He wants to meet with both of us," she said. "Tomorrow for lunch." I felt a flutter of anxiety. I hadn't seen Richard since Emily's disastrous graduation dinner 3 years ago. Why both of us? He says he wants to clear the air, get everyone on the same page. She made air quotes around his corporate speak phrases. I told him I'd check with you, that we'd be making decisions together from now on. The solidarity in her statement touched me deeply. For so long, Richard had positioned himself between us, creating separate relationships that allowed him to control the narrative with each of us. Emily's insistence on us functioning as a unit represented a fundamental shift in the power dynamic. What do you think? I asked. Should we meet with him? Emily considered the question. I think we should, on our terms, not his. He suggested his club, but I think we should choose a neutral location, somewhere public but private enough for a real conversation. We settled on a small cafe in downtown Scranton, casual enough that Richard wouldn't be able to use the setting to intimidate, but public enough that he'd be constrained from any outbursts. Emily called him back and set the arrangements, her tone polite but firm. That evening, as we prepared for the meeting, Emily helped me select an outfit, not the careful, self-effacing clothes I usually wore around Richard, but a deep blue sweater that brought out my eyes and well-fitting black pants that made me look polished and confident. Remember, she said as I tried on different earrings, you're not supplicating. You're not asking for anything. You're there as my mother, and as a woman who deserves respect in your own right. As I looked at my reflection, I was struck by how much our roles had shifted. Here was my daughter coaching me on confidence, reminding me of my worth. Perhaps that was the ultimate testament to my parenting, that I had raised a woman strong enough to help me reclaim my own strength when I needed it. The night before our meeting with Richard, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake, thinking about all the times I had diminished myself in his presence, accepted his version of events, prioritized Emily's relationship with him over my own dignity. Tomorrow would be different. Tomorrow, we would meet him as equals, armed with truth and evidence, no longer dependent on his approval or acceptance. I wasn't naive enough to believe Richard would suddenly acknowledge all his wrongs or transform into a different person. But for the first time in 24 years, I felt prepared to face him without fear, without insecurity, without the burden of keeping peace at all costs. Whatever happened at tomorrow's lunch, one thing was certain. Richard Bradshaw was no longer the author of our story. That role had been reclaimed by its rightful owners, Emily and me. The cafe was busy when we arrived, the lunch crowd a mix of office workers and locals. We'd chosen a table near the back, visible from the entrance but removed enough from other diners to allow for a private conversation. Emily and I ordered coffee while we waited, both too nervous to consider food yet. "Are you okay?" she asked, studying my face across the small table. I took a deep breath. Yes, anxious, but okay. You? Same. She fiddled with her napkin, folding it into smaller and smaller squares. I keep trying to predict what he'll say, how he'll try to spin this. That's his specialty, I agreed. Controlling the narrative. We fell silent as the door opened and Richard entered, scanning the room with the practiced ease of someone accustomed to making an entrance. He spotted us and approached, his expression carefully neutral, dressed in what for him was casual attire, a cashmere sweater over designer jeans, an expensive watch glinting at his wrist. Emily, Catherine. He nodded to each of us, then took the remaining seat. Thank you for agreeing to meet. A server appeared almost immediately. Richard had always had that effect, commanding attention without obvious effort. He ordered an espresso, then turned to us with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. I've been doing a lot of thinking since our conversation, Emily, he began. About the past, about the choices I made, about where we go from here. Emily nodded but didn't speak, waiting. I want to start by acknowledging that I haven't been entirely forthcoming about certain aspects of our family history, he continued, his voice measured, as if delivering a carefully rehearsed statement. When I was younger, I made decisions I'm not proud of, decisions that affected both of you. It was the closest thing to an admission of wrongdoing I'd ever heard from Richard, but I noticed his careful phrasing, acknowledging he hadn't been entirely forthcoming, rather than admitting he had lied, referencing decisions, rather than naming his specific actions. That's a start, Emily said, her voice neutral. But I think we need to be more specific about what actually happened. Richard's espresso arrived. He took a moment to add a packet of sugar, stirring methodically. I'm not sure revisiting every detail serves any purpose, Emily. What matters is moving forward, rebuilding trust. Trust requires truth. she replied firmly. "I need to hear you say it, Dad. I need you to acknowledge what you did to Mom, to me, to us." Richard glanced at me, then back to Emily. "This is exactly what I was concerned about. It seems Catherine has convinced you that I'm some sort of villain in this story, that there's only one truth, her version." I felt a familiar tightness in my chest, the sensation that had accompanied so many interactions with Richard over the years, the feeling of being dismissed, invalidated, erased. But this time, I didn't swallow it down, didn't prioritize peace over truth. "That's not what this is about, Richard," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "This isn't about vilifying you. It's about acknowledging what actually happened, not the convenient story you created years later." He turned to me, surprise flashing briefly across his features. I rarely contradicted him directly. "And what exactly do you think happened, Catherine?" His tone was patronizing, the way one might address a child with an overactive imagination. "You know exactly what happened," I said. "You denied Emily was yours when I told you I was pregnant. You offered me money to disappear. You threatened legal action if I tried to establish paternity. You had no contact with Emily for the first 8 years of her life, and you only reappeared when your father made it a condition of your inheritance." Richard's jaw tightened. "That's a very selective interpretation of events." "It's not an interpretation. It's what happened," I persisted. "We have the documents, Richard. The settlement offers from your lawyers, the trust provisions, your father's letter acknowledging what you did." For a moment, he looked genuinely startled. He hadn't known about Robert Bradshaw's letter to Elizabeth. Then his expression smoothed, corporate training kicking in. "I was 21, he said, as if that explained everything. "My father was grooming me to take over the family business. The timing was complicated. So was raising a child alone at 19, I replied. "The difference is, I didn't walk away from my responsibilities." Emily had been watching our exchange intently. Now she leaned forward. "Dad, we're not here to punish you or make you grovel, but I can't have a relationship with you that's built on lies. Lies about Mom, about my childhood, about how you came back into my life." Richard looked at her for a long moment, calculation visible in his eyes. Then his shoulders slumped slightly, the first genuine reaction he'd shown. "What do you want me to say? That I was a coward? That I panicked when your mother told me she was pregnant? That I convinced myself it would be better for everyone if I just removed myself from the equation?" He ran a hand through his hair, the gesture Emily had inherited. "Fine. Yes, all of that is true." The admission hung in the air between us. I felt tears prick at my eyes, not from pain, but from vindication. After 24 years, finally hearing him acknowledge what he had done. "And when you came back when I was 8? Emily prompted. "Was that because of Grandpa's trust conditions?" Richard hesitated, clearly weighing how much to admit. "Partially," he conceded. "My mother showed me your grandfather's letter, told me about the trust provisions. But it wasn't just about the money, Emily. I'd been thinking about reaching out anyway. For 8 years?" The skepticism in her voice was unmistakable. "Life gets complicated. Time passes. I told myself you were better off without me, that Catherine was doing a fine job on her own." He glanced at me, which she was. "But yes, the trust was the catalyst. I won't deny that." Emily nodded, accepting this partial truth. "And after you came back, when you started telling everyone that Mom had kept me from you, that was a lie. It wasn't a question, but Richard answered anyway. It was simpler that way, easier to explain why I hadn't been around. I never meant for it to hurt Catherine, but it did," I said quietly. "It painted me as vindictive, as using Emily to punish you, when the exact opposite was true. I spent years making up stories about you to Emily, creating this image of a father who couldn't be with us but loved her from afar. I protected your reputation long after you deserved it." Richard looked genuinely uncomfortable now. "I'm sorry for that. I didn't consider how it would affect you." The apology, minimal as it was, seemed to cost him considerable effort. In all the years I'd known him, I couldn't recall him ever saying those words to me. "Thank you," I said simply. Emily reached for her water glass, taking a sip before continuing. "Here's what's going to happen now, Dad. Mom and I are claiming the trust assets that Grandpa left for us. The legal process is already underway. It's not negotiable." Richard nodded, accepting what was clearly a fait accompli. "I understand. I won't contest it. Second, I need you to stop undermining Mom. No more subtle digs about her financial situation. No more rewriting our family history to cast yourself as the hero and her as the obstacle. If someone asks about our past, you either tell the truth or you say nothing. His expression tightened. Emily, you have to understand how delicate my position is. My professional reputation is built on a lie, she finished for him. I'm not asking you to take out a full-page ad confessing your sins, Dad. I'm asking you to stop actively spreading falsehoods about Mom in your social and business circles. Richard looked between us, assessing his options. And if I agree to these terms, what then? Then we move forward, Emily said simply. I continue having a relationship with you, but one based on truth rather than fiction. You continue being my father, but you stop pretending you were there when you weren't. He was quiet for a long moment, the practiced corporate persona slipping to reveal a glimpse of genuine emotion. Regret, perhaps, or simply recognition of his limited options. All right, he said finally. I agree to your terms, but I hope you understand that people change, Emily. The man I was at 21 isn't the man I am now. Whatever my initial motivations for coming back into your life, my feelings for you are real. Emily nodded, accepting this without either embracing or rejecting it. I believe you believe that, and I'm willing to build a new relationship with you. The real you, not the perfect father you've pretended to be. The tension around the table eased slightly. We ordered lunch, the conversation shifting to more neutral topics. Emily's plans for freelance work, my tentative exploration of nursing school. Richard listened with what seemed like genuine interest, offering connections for Emily's journalism endeavors without the usual strings attached. As we prepared to leave, Richard asked for a moment alone with me. Emily squeezed my hand reassuringly before stepping outside to take a phone call, leaving us facing each other across the small table. I underestimated you, Catherine, he said after a moment. I always have. Yes, I agreed simply. You have. For what it's worth, I am sorry for how things played out. Not just with Emily, but with you. You deserved better. I studied his face, searching for sincerity beneath the polished exterior. There was something there. Not enough to erase the past, but perhaps enough to make peace with it. Thank you for saying that, I said. It matters, even after all this time. He nodded, then reached into his pocket and withdrew a business card, sliding it across the table. My new private number. If you need anything, for Emily, for yourself, call me directly. No lawyers, no assistants, just me. I picked up the card, recognizing the gesture for what it was. Not complete redemption, but an acknowledgement that I had earned direct access, that I no longer needed to go through intermediaries to reach him. I hope you do go to nursing school, he added unexpectedly. You would be excellent at it. You always were a caretaker, even when it cost you everything. Outside, I joined Emily on the sidewalk, breathing in the cold, clear winter air. How did it go? She asked. Better than I expected, I admitted. I think he might actually be capable of change in small doses. Revolutionary concept, she said with a small smile. Dad is a fallible human being rather than either hero or villain. We walked arm in arm toward her car, our breath forming clouds in the frigid air. The confrontation I had feared for so long, the moment when Richard would be forced to acknowledge the truth, had come and gone, leaving neither the vindication of complete victory nor the bitterness of defeat, but something more nuanced, the quiet satisfaction of having finally been heard. That evening, as Emily and I sat in my living room discussing her ideas for investigative pieces and my application to nursing school, my phone chimed with an email notification. It was from Richard, addressed to both Emily and me. The subject line read simply, "Setting the record straight." With trepidation, I opened it. Emily reading over my shoulder. Catherine and Emily. After our conversation today, I realized there are others who should hear the truth from me directly. I've just spoken with my mother's sister, Margaret, who has perpetuated the fiction that Catherine kept Emily from me during those early years. I've clarified the actual circumstances and asked her to correct this misunderstanding with anyone she may have shared it with. I've also instructed my assistant to amend my biographical information wherever it appears, corporate websites, speaker bios, etc., to remove references to my dedication as a father from day one and similar falsehoods. These are small steps, but important ones in honoring our agreement and acknowledging the truth of our shared history. Richard, I looked at Emily, surprised. I didn't expect this. Me neither, she admitted. I thought he'd do the bare minimum, just enough to placate us. Maybe he's capable of more than we thought, I said. Emily closed her laptop, where she'd been researching a story about environmental contamination in rural Pennsylvania communities. Or maybe he finally realized he has more to lose by clinging to the lie than by accepting the truth. Either way, it was a beginning. The first steps toward a relationship among the three of us that acknowledged reality, rather than perpetuating convenient fictions. I had no illusions that Richard had transformed overnight, or that all the damage of the past had been undone. But something significant had shifted. Something fundamental had been reclaimed. For the first time in 24 years, we were all operating from the same set of facts, the same understanding of our shared history. And that, I realized, was its own kind of victory. Quieter than vindication, more enduring than revenge, more healing than any financial settlement could ever be. The truth, finally, had found its voice, and we had found ours. Spring arrived early that year in Scranton, as if nature itself were acknowledging the fresh starts unfolding in our lives. The snow melted, revealing tender green shoots pushing through the softening earth. Trees that had stood stark and bare against winter skies now showed delicate buds, promises of renewal written in the smallest details. 3 months had passed since the confrontation with Richard, since Emily had discovered the truth about her origins, since I had finally stopped diminishing myself to protect others from uncomfortable realities. 3 months of transformation, of rewriting not our history, but our present and future. The trust assets had been transferred as promised. My share now sat in investment accounts managed by a financial advisor Emily had researched thoroughly, a woman who specialized in helping people unused to wealth make thoughtful decisions. The cabin in the Poconos had been officially deeded to us jointly, and we had visited it twice, walking the property in reverent silence, imagining Robert Bradshaw purchasing it for the granddaughter he would never meet, for the woman who had raised her alone. But the most significant changes weren't financial. I had been accepted to the accelerated nursing program at the University of Scranton, due to begin in June. I had given notice at the medical center, my supervisor's surprise at my resignation giving way to genuine congratulations when I explained my plans. Colleagues I'd worked with for years hosted a small going-away party, many expressing admiration for my courage in pursuing a long-deferred dream. Emily had moved back to Scranton temporarily, taking over the lease on a small but charming apartment downtown, while she built her freelance career. Her first major piece, an investigation into water contamination affecting rural Pennsylvania communities, had been published in a respected online journal, leading to interest from larger publications. She was already working on her next story, about elderly patients being exploited in certain for-profit nursing homes. Our relationship had evolved too, deepened, matured, found a new equilibrium based on mutual respect, rather than the complicated dynamics of the past. We had dinner together at least once a week, sharing professional triumphs and challenges, gradually rebuilding the easy companionship of her childhood, but with a new dimension of adult friendship layered over the mother-daughter bond. And Richard was trying, in his way. He had kept his word about correcting the narrative, had even gone further than promised by mentioning to several business associates that Catherine raised Emily single-handedly for 8 years. She deserves the credit for the remarkable woman our daughter has become. Emily had reported this to me with a mixture of surprise and satisfaction after attending a business dinner at his invitation. Today was moving day. I was downsizing from my small house to an even smaller apartment closer to the university, a practical decision that would reduce my commute when classes began and lower my living expenses during the 15 months of intensive study ahead. Emily had arrived early to help, bringing coffee and bagels and a determined cheerfulness about the task before us. "I still think you should consider something nicer," she said, as we sorted through kitchen items, deciding what to keep and what to donate. "You can afford it now." I wrapped a chipped mug in newspaper, one Emily had painted for me at a ceramic studio when she was 10, bearing the wobbly inscription, "World's Best Mom," inside a lopsided heart. The point isn't to upgrade my lifestyle dramatically. It's to use this money thoughtfully, sustainably. Emily placed a stack of plates in a box. "I know. I just want you to enjoy some comfort after all those years of struggle." "I am," I assured her. "Comfort for me is knowing I can focus completely on my studies without worrying about bills. It's knowing I have a safety net if something goes wrong. It's knowing your future is secure." She smiled, the expression so like her younger self that it made my heart ache with recognition. You're still putting me first, aren't you? Old habits, I acknowledged. But I'm learning. I've started a travel fund, you know. Places I've always wanted to see but never thought I'd have the chance. Really? Where? Italy, for one. I want to see Rome, Florence, Venice, and Japan. The cherry blossoms in spring. Oh, and New Zealand. All those landscapes from the movies. Emily looked delighted. We should go together. Not all of them, maybe, but one at least. After you graduate, before you start your nursing career. The easy way she included herself in my dreams, the assumption of shared experiences to come, warmed me in a way I couldn't articulate. After years of watching her drift toward Richard's orbit, away from mine, this casual inclusion felt like a homecoming. We worked through the morning, packing and sorting, reminiscing over objects that held shared memories, the mismatched teacups we'd collected from thrift stores, the wobbly bookshelf my father had built that had held Emily's picture books and later her textbooks, the patchwork quilt I'd made during her nap times when she was a toddler. Around noon, the doorbell rang, the movers arriving earlier than expected. But when I opened the door, it was Richard who stood on the porch, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. "I hope I'm not intruding," he said, holding up a paper bag. "I brought lunch. Thought you might be hungry with all the packing." I hesitated, then stepped back to let him in. That was thoughtful. We were just about to take a break. Emily appeared in the hallway, surprise flickering across her face before she composed herself. "Dad, we weren't expecting you. I called your apartment, and when you didn't answer, I figured you might be here." He held up the bag again. "Sandwiches from that deli you like." And I thought, maybe I could help? With the moving? The offer was so unexpected, so unlike the Richard we knew, the man who hired people to handle physical tasks, who considered manual labor beneath him, that neither of us immediately responded. "You want to help us pack?" Emily finally asked, her tone somewhere between skeptical and amused. Richard looked around at the boxes, the newspaper, the general disarray. "Well, I'm not exactly experienced with this sort of thing, but I can follow instructions, if you want." The vulnerability in his voice, the genuine effort to step into our world rather than expecting us to accommodate his, touched me despite my lingering wariness. "We could use another pair of hands," I said, surprising myself, especially with the books. They're heavy. We ate lunch in the nearly empty kitchen, sitting on folding chairs around a card table I'd borrowed from a neighbor, using paper plates and plastic cutlery. It was about as far from the elegant restaurants Richard preferred as one could get, but he made no comment about the makeshift arrangements, seeming almost comfortable in the informal setting. As we ate, he asked thoughtful questions about my nursing program, about Emily's latest investigative piece, actually listening to our answers instead of waiting for his turn to speak. There was an awkwardness to the conversation, moments of silence and hesitation, but underlying it was something new, an effort, a reaching toward connection that felt genuine despite its clumsiness. After lunch, Richard removed his expensive watch, rolled up his sleeves, and followed Emily's directions to the shelves of books that needed packing. I watched them work together, Emily efficiently wrapping the more fragile volumes in paper, Richard carefully placing them in boxes, their heads bent in similar concentration despite their different coloring. "You're good at this," Emily commented, as Richard found a way to fit an oversized art book into a nearly full box. "I wouldn't have expected it. I used to help my grandfather in his workshop when I was a boy," Richard said, securing the box with packing tape, before my father decided it wasn't a suitable activity for a Bradshaw heir. He had good spatial reasoning, my grandfather. I guess some of it rubbed off. It was a glimpse into a Richard we'd never seen, the boy before the corporate grooming, before the weight of family expectations had shaped him into the man he became. I wondered fleetingly what might have been different if that boy had been allowed to develop naturally, if the pressures of the Bradshaw legacy hadn't forced him to choose status over integrity. By mid-afternoon, the movers had arrived in earnest, loading furniture and boxes into their truck with practiced efficiency. Richard stayed through it all, carrying smaller items to his own car to transport separately, conferring with the movers about the best way to handle my father's antique desk, even ordering pizza for everyone when the work stretched into evening. As the last box was loaded and the movers departed for my new apartment, the three of us stood in the empty living room, surveying the bare walls, the indentations in the carpet where furniture had stood, the dust outlines marking where pictures had hung. "It looks so small," Emily observed. "I never realized how small this house actually was until now, seeing it empty." I nodded, feeling a complex mixture of emotions. Nostalgia for the home where we'd created so many memories, excitement for the new chapter ahead, a tinge of sadness for all the years when this modest house had represented the best I could provide despite wishing for more. "You made it feel bigger," Richard said quietly, surprising us both. When Emily would describe coming home from school, the projects you'd work on together, the movie nights and blanket forts, it always sounded like a much grander place in her stories. I looked at him, trying to gauge his intent, searching for signs of the subtle digs he'd often delivered about my financial circumstances. But his expression held only thoughtfulness, perhaps even a hint of regret. "It wasn't about the size," Emily said, looking around the room. "It was about how it felt. Safe, consistent, ours." Richard nodded, accepting this truth without trying to insert himself into it. Another small shift, another indication of his halting efforts to acknowledge our reality, rather than imposing his preferred narrative. As we prepared to leave, Emily and I to the new apartment, Richard back to his elegant Center City condo, he hesitated at the door. "I've been thinking," he said, addressing me directly, "about what you said that day at the cafe, about protecting my reputation long after I deserved it, about the stories you told Emily about me when she was little." I waited, unsure where he was going with this. "That was a profound kindness," he continued, his voice lower, more genuine than his usual confident tone. "One I didn't earn and didn't appreciate until recently. I want you to know I recognize that now. What it cost you, what it gave Emily, what it says about your character. The acknowledgement, coming so unexpectedly in this empty house that had sheltered so many unsaid truths, brought tears to my eyes, not from pain or vindication, but from the simple relief of being seen, truly seen, after so many years of invisibility. Thank you for saying that," I managed. Richard nodded, seeming to understand that the moment called for restraint, rather than elaborate apologies or promises. He turned to Emily. "I'll meet you at the new place? Help unload?" "Sure, Dad," she said. "We'll be right behind you." After he left, Emily and I stood together in the empty living room, the space echoing slightly with our movements. She slipped her hand into mine, a gesture she hadn't made since childhood. "You okay?" she asked. I squeezed her hand. "Yes. It's strange, letting go of this place. So many memories." "We're not letting go of the memories," she said, "just the walls that contained them." I smiled at her wisdom. My daughter, who had somehow navigated the complicated legacy of her beginnings to become this insightful, compassionate woman. "When did you get so smart?" I asked, echoing a question I'd often asked her as a child when she'd make some unexpectedly profound observation. "I had a good teacher," she replied, bumping her shoulder against mine in the familiar way of our earlier years. "We did a final walkthrough, checking closets and cabinets, making sure nothing had been left behind. In my bedroom, the last room we entered, Emily paused by the window that overlooked the small backyard where she had played as a child. "I said something terrible to you 3 months ago," she said, her back to me. "The worst thing I've ever said to anyone." I knew immediately what she meant. The accusation that had started everything, that had finally forced me to show her my scar and tell her the truth. "You were hurt," I said, confused. She turned to face me. "That's no excuse. I need to tell you something, Mom, and I need you to really hear it." I nodded, waiting. "You are the most loving person I have ever known," she said, her voice steady, though her eyes glistened. "Not perfect, nobody is, but consistently, fundamentally loving in a way that shaped who I am, who I want to be. I was angry that day, and I lashed out at the person I knew would still be there afterward, the person who had always been there." She took a step closer. "When you showed me your scar, when you told me the truth about my birth, about choosing me even when it might have cost your life, I was too shocked, too defensive to really take it in. But I've thought about it every day since, about what real love looks like. Not showy gestures or expensive gifts, but daily choices, constant presence, unshakable commitment." Tears spilled down my cheeks now, but I didn't wipe them away. This moment felt sacred somehow, a healing I hadn't known I still needed. "You never had to show me that scar," Emily continued. I should have known without physical evidence. I should have seen it in everything you've ever done, in every sacrifice you've made, in every time you put me first. And I'm so sorry I ever questioned it, even for a moment. I closed the distance between us, pulling her into an embrace. I love you, I said simply. I have from the first moment, and I always will. Nothing you could say or do would ever change that. We stood there in the empty room, holding each other, the ghosts of our shared past swirling around us, the sleepless nights with a colicky infant, the homework struggles, the teenage arguments, the graduations and celebrations, the silent worries and quiet triumphs that make up a life together. All of it meaningful, all of it part of our story. Finally, Emily stepped back, wiping her eyes with a slightly embarrassed laugh. We should go. Dad and the movers are waiting. Yes, I agreed, taking one last look around the bedroom where I'd spent so many years. It's time. We left the house together, closing the door on our old life without regret or fear. As we walked to our separate cars, Emily called over her shoulder, "Race you to the new place?" I laughed, feeling lighter than I had in years. "You'll win. You always do. That's because you taught me to run toward what I want, not away from what I fear," she replied, her voice carrying on the spring breeze. As I drove toward my new apartment, toward nursing school, toward dreams long deferred now within reach, toward a future I was finally claiming for myself, I thought about the scar that had started our journey toward truth, the physical reminder of the moment when I had chosen Emily's life over my own safety, when I had become a mother in both body and soul. I had carried that scar for 24 years, hidden beneath clothes, private, personal. But there were other, invisible scars too, marks left by Richard's rejection, by years of financial struggle, by the constant weight of solo parenting, by watching my daughter drift toward her father and his easier path. Those scars had shaped me as surely as the one on my abdomen, had formed the woman I had become. But scars, I realized, aren't just markers of pain endured. They're evidence of healing, of survival, of the body's remarkable ability to repair itself. My journey with Emily had left its marks on both of us, but it had also forged something beautiful and enduring, a bond tested by fire and found unbreakable. At a stoplight, I caught a glimpse of myself in the rearview mirror, gray threading through my dark hair, fine lines around my eyes, but a clarity and purpose in my expression that hadn't been there before. I was Catherine Brennan, soon to be Catherine Brennan, RN. I was Emily's mother. I was, at long last, my own person, with dreams and possibilities stretching before me like an open road. The light turned green, and I drove forward into my future, carrying my scars not as burdens, but as badges of honor, as proof of a life fully lived, of love given without condition or expectation, of choices made that I would make again, 1,000 times over, without hesitation or regret. Because some scars aren't just marks of what we've survived. They're proof of what we've chosen, what we've sacrificed for, what we've loved beyond measure. And in the end, those are the scars that tell our truest stories.